The Lost Property Office by James R Hannibal, Chapter 20. Jack! The ghostly hands evaporated in a breath of cold wind as Gwen helped Jack up from the pavement. Are you okay? Did that biker hit you? I'm fine. Jack was relieved to hear his own voice. He could speak again. At least, I think I am. How long was I out? What do you mean, how long? I rushed over as soon as you fell. Sure enough, he could still hear the motorcycle fading into the distance. The accident couldn't have happened more than a few seconds before, but the vision seemed much longer. The beetle, he said, trying to clear his mind. Was the clockmaker here? Only his little emissary buzzed off for the moment. She steadied him, brushing the dust off his shoulders. Jack, what happened when you fell? He sat down on the curb, taking great care to avoid touching the street with his bare hands. Do trackers see things? Not like finding kerosene boot prints or visualizing fish smells, but things. He looked up at her. You know, hallucinations? Gwen's eyes went wide. You sparked! Whoa, Jack helped up his hands. I did no such... Wait, what? You sparked. She sat down beside him. You got a spark, a vision, by touching an object. You saw something from the past. Recent, distant, either one. Is that what happened? He nodded dumbly. She nodded with him, gaze falling to the cobblestones. Brilliant. She was silent for several seconds. Gwen? Yes? He shrugged and raised his hands. Oh, right, explanation. Her freckles bounced, and she waved a hand, gesturing at nothing in particular. The world around us is full of memories, Jack. Light and sound get trapped in rigid material like stone and steel, recorded like data on a disk drive. You can access that data. Your unique sensory matrix allows you to sort of download the memories. You're saying I can see movies of the past by touching random stuff. The clerk wiggled a hand. Let's not oversimplify. Trackers can only spark on minerals, and each type yields a different result. The memory of stone runs deep, going back hundreds, sometimes thousands of years. But the sounds and images are dull, mere echoes and shadows. Steel and iron are the opposite. They retain greater detail, but the data remains shallow near the surface. It gets overwritten quickly, like RAM on a computer. So I either get shadows of a distant past or clear images of something that just happened? A nod and another freckle bounce with a hint of slyness to it. Unless you spark on a gemstone, a big one like the giants of the crown jewels. Light penetrates deep into the gemstones, and their hard, crystalline structures hold sights and sounds practically forever. Trackers have solved century-old murders and located tombs of pharaohs simply by holding a famous jewel in their hands. Jack slowly stood, taking a step back. He needed space to breathe, to think. Why don't you tell me all about this back at the Lost Property Office? It shouldn't have come up at all. Sparking takes years of training. Even with instruction, no tracker under the age of 18 has ever managed it. Gwen popped up to join him. Until you, Jack. Isn't that brilliant? He did not share her excitement. The idea of seeing the past recorded in everyday objects explained the vision of the hand at the chamber and the vision of the clockmaker entering the house with the blue door, but it certainly didn't cover specters trying to drag him down through the cobblestones. That was no memory. It felt more like crossing over into another world. Look, Gwen led him to the center of the lane again. We have to keep at this if we expect to get anywhere. What did you see when you fell? Shapes, darkness, nothing useful. Jack wasn't ready to tell her about the ghosts. He would never find his father if the only person helping him thought he was crazy. The freckles sank with disappointment. That's all right, being your first time and all. Cobblestones are rubbish for sparking anyway. Cheap rock, all that traffic. Next time, we'll find you some proper stone. Wait a second. Her efforts to lower his expectations made Jack defensive. I did see shadows, and that looked like people running and a big explosion. I thought I heard an air raid siren, too. Well, why didn't you say so? Gwen scrunched up her brow, processing the information. Then she slapped her forehead. World War II, very common for new trackers. The first memory you see in stone will always be the most traumatic, until you learn to focus your sparks. That is. Here in London, that's often a World War II bombing raid. The stones don't like those one bit. What about the Great Fire? Wouldn't that qualify as traumatic? Yes, but what if these stones never saw the fire? I'll bet they were laid during the reconstruction, right in the ashes of old Pudding Lane. Ashes? Jack gazed down at the unusual whiteness of the grout. What kind of ashes? All kinds. There was a great deep field of it after the fire, and the king and his architects rebuilt London right on top of it all. The ashes became the foundation of the new city. Sure, all kinds. As he stared down at the disturbing ash grout, Jack picked up a hint of red, a tiny triangular rock deep in the grout, deep in the crack between the stones. It wasn't lying on top of the grout like the gum or the cigarettes. It was part of the grout, worked into it from the beginning. Once he isolated the first fragment, the others started popping up all around him, floating above the stones in his mind's eye. The distribution of the pieces formed a half circle in the lane, 20 feet long. I see something. I can tell, said Gwen, a hint of exasperation in her voice. Would you mind telling me what it is? Jack squatted down to pick up the largest piece, barely the size of a dime, but he curled his fingers back as they neared the cobblestones. Why didn't you get it? Your fingers are smaller. They'll fit between the stones. She shrugged and knelt beside him, sticking a delicate pinky down into the gap and rubbing the fragment. It's rough, like bricks. And look how deep it is. I bet this was recently exposed, after the grout above it eroded in the rain. Jack showed her the half-circle pattern and watched her smile widen the whole time. This is it, she said, walking the perimeter of the brick fragments. This is the epicenter. How can you be so sure? My uncle, remember? Gwen pointed to Jack's eyes with 2 fingers. The trackers observes. Then she tapped her head. The quartermaster deduces. Detective teamwork at its finest. Uncle Percy taught me everything there is to know about the art of deduction. And you deduce from a few slivers of red brick that this is the epicenter? It's simply elementary, you might say, if you take a moment to think about it. The brick is in the grout. The grout comes from the period right after the Great Fire, and at the time of the fire, the only one building on Pudding Lane was made of bricks. She cocked her head toward Jack, and that building was the bakery. Gwen punched his arm. Brilliant, and the bakery is where it all began. Great, good work. So where's the ember? Her smile flattened. Don't know. Haven't gotten that far, I'm afraid. Jack leaned back against the apartment building that stood in the place of the burned bakery. He sighed. Maybe we're going about this all wrong. My dad used to say that where is a wasted question. If you don't start with who first. Gwen punched him again. Of course, John Buckles said that. It's an old tracker saying. She pressed her lips together, looking off into space for several seconds. Finally, she nodded, and it tells us we should have started with the baker instead of the bakery. Jack was beginning to develop a bruise where she kept hitting him. He frowned, rubbing his arm. Except the baker's been gone 350 years. Perhaps. The freckles rose into a smile, but I know where to find him.